mother and father fall in love.
For crying out loud, I haven't even been born yet.
And only Dr. Brown can help him get back to the future.
Are you telling me that this sucker is nuclear? Precisely.
Michael J. Fox.
Whoa, this is heavy.
Christopher Lloyd.
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
Back to the future.
And we're back, like we never left. Welcome to episode 210 in the car of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of this Sunday evening with me here in New York on my drive home. We're going to skip all that promotional BS and get right to the meat of the episode, because I figure you already subscribed, you already listened to the podcast on the audio platform, so don't need to pitch you. You've come this far. You're on the team. So, thank you. But today is Michael J. Fox's 63rd birthday. And for someone who came on the scene as such a kind of vibrant force of nature, it hurts to see his health deteriorate as significantly as it has. And it's difficult to sort of imagine when someone's really young and famous and popular and seems like a good guy on top of that. You don't, and certainly I don't, think in terms of them becoming a tragic figure. But Michael J. Fox, unfortunately, is a bit of a tragic figure, because at a very young age, I think that he was I don't believe that he'd even turned 30 when he started to show symptoms of the illness which would unfortunately define the second half of his life, Parkinson's. And I guess there's a certain personal irony in that two of my favorite quote-unquote celebrities or historical figures, in one case, an athlete, Muhammad Ali, and humanitarian, and Michael J. Fox, an actor and humanitarian, both of them became, when their affliction took hold, very inspiring and sympathetic figures. And the two guys raised a ton of money for Parkinson's research, and nobody knows if there are certain conditions, syndromes, diseases, where you could theoretically solve it or cure it or come up with some kind of a foolproof treatment. We've seen that. But Parkinson's, the way that its degenerative nature, it seems that the best that could ever be achieved is to somehow, if you catch it really early, to somehow prevent the deterioration. And even with the best quality health care that Michael J. Fox has gotten since his diagnosis, something was wrong in 91, but the diagnosis didn't come through until 92, would be the best way to describe it. But with the best possible medical care for decades, he could barely walk. And seeing him at some of the award shows, like at the BAFTAs, the British Academy Film Awards, seeing him on stage, struggling to stand and struggling to speak clearly because his body is shaking so much, it's horrible. It's heartbreaking. And a lot of people said that for decades about Ali, that, you know, the illness robbed him, because he wasn't very young when he started showing very heavy symptoms of Parkinson's. He was still in his 30s, so he was a little bit older. Now, in the case of Ali, because he was a boxer and he took a lot of blows to the head, not surprisingly, the most likely outcome for him is that he had a genetic marker which increased the chance that he was going to develop Parkinson's, and the boxing made it that much more likely. I guess that's how you would describe it in his case. But Michael J. Fox, like a thunderbolt, came on the scene in the early 1980s. And I've been a fan the whole way, from the first time I watched the TV show Family Ties. And there are some people who are identified, actors, actresses, identified by a certain character. And in the case of Michael J. Fox, he's identified as Marty McFly. But the first character that brought him to the fore showed him as a talent to be reckoned with, and as someone that we'd never quite seen. When I say we, meaning, American public TV watching and consumerism at large. We'd never seen anyone quite like him when he hit the scene. And Family Ties premiered, I was 7, 8 years old. But something happened with that show that does not happen under all but the most extenuating and bizarre circumstances, where if a certain performer has to leave the show to do something else, or that kind of scenario. But normally once the concept is sold to the studio and everybody, they go ahead and they do it, you're not going to just change the concept and change the focus of the show. It's not done. It's not done very often. It is quite rare. And so Michael J. Fox, he was 20 when he was cast as Alex P. Keaton on it's a top 10 greatest sitcoms. I mean, there are people that put it in a top 5. I think it's the single best sitcom, certainly, that I've ever seen. And I grew up watching a lot of them. And I saw great ones like Alice and Barney Miller and Cheers and so many of the great ones. The Cosby Show, Seinfeld. But I put Family Ties, just from what I've seen, I put Family Ties above them all. There was such a sense of humanity beneath the laughs. And Michael J. Fox was the show. But that's not the show that was originally sold to NBC. The original concept, given the time frame of early 1980s, it was actually a really cool concept. The idea was a married couple, a former radical, Timothy Leary, late 60s type radical couple, are now settled down in suburban, I think they're supposed to be in Cincinnati, but they're settled in suburbia and raising a family. And we get the idea that they've done some illegal shit that somebody could one day come knocking at their door and maybe arrest at least one of them. But I think it would be more Elise, the mom, who would have been in trouble. I feel like the father, Stephen P. Keaton, was just sort of going along because he was so infatuated with the woman he ended up marrying. But the first season of the show follows that concept, where you have a husband, a wife, and the actors are so good. Michael Gross, who was in Tremors, a number of the Tremors movies, a terrific actor, kind of an everyman type, but very, very solid, and he had impeccable comic timing. Meredith Baxter, at the time, Meredith Baxter Burney, now Meredith Baxter, and the kids were played by the youngest at that time, Tina Yothers, plays Jennifer, and a fantastic Justine Bateman as the older sister, Mallory, and Michael J. Fox as the eldest sibling, Alex P. Keaton. But the first season of the show focused on the parents, and the father runs a small TV station, a little bit of a nod to his radical roots, that he's running a public television station and pushing for edgier content, stuff like that. The show is good, but it did just okay in the ratings. It was on the border at the end of the first season of cancellation. And I don't know what the mechanics of this were. The showrunner, Gary David Goldberg, is an absolute genius. He did a number of other successful shows, and he was also involved in movies. He did a film with Ted Danson and the magnificent Jack Lemmon called Dad, and Olympia Dukakis was in it in the late 80s, and that got a lot of acclaim in some quarters for Lemmon's performance. There was some Oscar buzz. But I don't know the mechanics of this. I just know that at the end of the first season, the show potentially was on the firing line. Some people watched it. It wasn't a bomb, but it wasn't doing enough to kind of justify continuance. But people at NBC, and I think this is not the Warren Littlefield, this is well before. Littlefield might have been with the company, but I don't think that he was running it at this point. Everybody who had seen that show all came to the same conclusion. This kid, Michael J. Fox, is magic. This kid is extraordinary. We've never seen a sitcom actor do what he's doing in a limited role. Now, I should point out, he won the Emmy for supporting actor. That was not a coincidence. It wasn't just the people at NBC or randoms watching on TV like, wow, this kid is great. Everybody was coming to the same conclusion. This is a special performer. He is hitting his marks differently. His line readings, you can't teach somebody to do what he's doing. To be so perfect with the punchline, to be so perfect with the setup, with the reaction shots. He was doing everything in a textbook fashion, and yet it felt fresh because he was a new face. And the show had the makings of a really good TV show. So NBC wanted to keep the show, but they decided with Goldberg, we have to shift the focus. Alex P. Keaton, he's the star. The parents are supporting, not Alex and his sisters. And with that decision, which, hey, they could have gone in another direction. They could have said, no, we love the stuff with the parents. We'll take our chances. They went for it. They went for broke, changing the main focus of the show entirely. There's almost no mention of the parents' like wacky past after the first season because they're not the focus anymore. And there's no version of the show where the FBI was going to come knocking and arrest one of them or some nonsense. It wasn't going to happen. With the focus squarely on Alex P. Keaton, the show Family Ties became a runaway success. And part of NBC's vaunted, and I don't use that lightly, their vaunted Thursday night lineup, which extended to the days of Seinfeld and the days of Friends. They always had the big hitters on Thursday. Family Ties was so successful that it often was 1-2 with the Cosby Show. And I think it aired after the Cosby Show. I know they were back to back. I think it aired after the Cosby Show, that the Cosby Show got the prime slot of 8. I'm pretty sure that Family Ties got 8:30. And a show that I fucking loved, an hour show at 10 o'clock on Thursdays, LA Law. What a great TV show that was. Not a comedy, though. It was very serious. Michael J. Fox, though, won 3 consecutive Best Actor Emmys. This was not an accident. It was absolutely deserved, and people couldn't stop talking about how good he was. You'd think that at a certain point in time, people would get tired of going over the obvious. This kid is fucking amazing. So he was cast in a TV movie, which, you know, when you're a kid in the 80s, you're a Gen Xer. Oh, Michael J. Fox is in a TV movie with Nancy McKeon, another big sitcom star from, what the hell was the show? Facts of Life. You take the good, you take the bad, you take them both, and there you have the facts of life. Da-da-da-da-da-da. And that was a show which actually had been spun off from Different Strokes. The character played by Charlotte Rae, Mrs. Garrett, who was the lead in Facts of Life. So that was a spin-off. But I saw Poison Ivy. Michael J. Fox gets together with Nancy McKeon, who was the star of Facts of Life. It's a TV movie. It's fucking stupid. It's like summer camp type film. But he was cast in Teen Wolf. And this was the time when Robert Zemeckis, Bob Gale, and Steven Spielberg, under the imprimatur of the MCA Universal banner, you know, Spielberg was already an enormously successful filmmaker, and Amblin Entertainment existed, but Spielberg was not yet at the level of the business where he could simply do what he wanted. He was still working for Universal, and the very tough, brilliant, but very tough screw that was Sid Sheinberg. And so as they were getting ready to make what would become Back to the Future, the only guy that Gale and Zemeckis and Spielberg wanted for the role was Michael J. Fox. And Spielberg had a professional relationship. He was friends with Gary David Goldberg, whatever that's worth. And he asked a very obvious question of Gary David Goldberg, I want to give this script to the kid. Can I give him the script? And Gary David Goldberg had been approached by other times at other situations, and he always would say yes. So he didn't say anything to Spielberg, but he took Spielberg's script for Back to the Future. And he did not just give it to Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox was working on the sitcom, and that's pretty much a full-time job. Goldberg reads Back to the Future first. The irony is, if he thought the script was not anything other than spectacular, he would have handed Michael the script, but he read it and he was wowed. He was dazzled. He couldn't believe how good this screenplay was, and he saw, man, Steven's going to make a great movie out of this. So he called Spielberg, something to the effect of, Steve, I got some good news and I got some bad news. Oh, what? Give me the good news. He said, well, I know you didn't actually give it to me for my opinion, but this might be the best screenplay I've ever read. This is an incredible work. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Spielberg says, oh, because he wasn't thinking that Goldberg was going to read it. He goes, oh, well, Gary, that's great. That's terrific. I mean, you know your shit, whatever, back and forth. What's the bad news? Bad news is I can't let Michael read it, because if I do, he will leave the show to shoot your movie, and we can't have that happen. I'm sorry. I can't allow this to happen. Needless to say, it ended up happening. Spielberg bent over backwards, and everybody contorted themselves. Now, I skipped over the whole Eric Stoltz thing. When Gary David Goldberg told them, we can't do it, I can't let him go, I'll have to release him from his contract, we can't do it, because he's gonna just leave the show. That's when Spielberg and Zemeckis hired Eric Stoltz. I don't know if the Eric Stoltz had been considered. I feel like they targeted Michael, I'm pretty sure, from the start. And then they didn't have a choice. They couldn't get it to Michael, so they went with Stoltz. And look, Eric Stoltz shot 6 weeks. We've seen some of the footage. Nobody knows exactly what percentage of the movie they shot with Eric Stoltz. I'm sure that at some point in time, somebody will put together a bizarre alternate universe assembly cut in which both actors play Marty McFly. I'm sure it can be done. But the problem with Stoltz, he's a very serious, sober, existential type of a performer. He is in his other work, even in a movie like Rob Roy. Stoltz was all wrong for this role. And some of the cast members mentioned, like Leah Thompson, who she worked with again in Some Kind of Wonderful. She had a good relationship with him, but she felt that he was so deep into this method acting that he was doing that he was behaving in a kind of antisocial way, and it was hurting morale. And from the perspective of the producers, Spielberg, who was very hands-on, even though it was not his film, it was Zemeckis, and Gale was the key guy from the production end. Spielberg was convinced that Stoltz was not getting the laughs that they needed to get. He was playing this movie as if it was almost Greek tragedy, and little bits of farce, but he was playing it more straightforward. It's not that he couldn't deliver the lines or that he didn't have the right reaction shots. It's just that the laughs weren't there. And somebody like Spielberg, even though comedy is not really his main function, he knows what it is. He understands there's certain beats. This was supposed to be funny, and Eric is not giving us that laugh. The audience is confused. He's not getting to where he needs to get it. But if Fox was locked up, they were screwed. So after 6 weeks of shooting, Spielberg again begged and pleaded and basically bent over back-assward. He said, listen, just give the kid the script. We'll work around your schedule. Give Michael the opportunity. You know, this is the sort of free will thing. Let the kid make up his own mind, Gary. We'll do whatever we can. But just think of it this way. If he finds out that he was targeted and that we went this far repeatedly to try to get him, and you didn't let it happen, he's not going to be a happy camper. Whatever they said, Goldberg finally acquiesced. He said, all right, you know what, Steven, you're right. I'm not trying to screw you up here. I love you, man, whatever. He gives the script to Michael. Not surprisingly, Michael hits the ceiling. I'm in. Now, the downside is, and this is before I knew that Michael J. Fox was sick, this was trivia and facts that were readily available, in the 90s. This is not anything that just came out. I remember reading and seeing a little bit of thing on TV in the 80s, which showed that Michael J. Fox was working on both Family Ties and Back to the Future concurrently. And that he was sleeping on a cot on the set of Back to the Future, trying to grab a catnap, grab an hour, 2 hours here or there. But he was working furiously, because just the sitcom would be a full-time job. He was working and working. And to a much lesser extent than, for example, Ali, who clearly had a marker for Parkinson's, and boxing made it that much more likely for him for the gene for it to trigger. Nobody will say for 100% certain, but it's logical that this crazy, super hectic stretch of working 20 plus hours a day for quite some time, a couple months, it probably sped up when he was going to first see symptoms. You don't throw it back, and history is forever grateful to Gary David Goldberg for finally agreeing to let Fox read that script. Fox wouldn't throw it back. And Eric Stoltz now, great part of the story in his own right, that we can compare some of the reaction shots and all of that. But that movie does not become what it becomes. And Michael J. Fox does not become what he still is. The character of Marty McFly is a top 10 greatest cinematic characters ever. I put him up there. He's in a conversation with Indiana Jones. He's in a conversation with Harry Callahan. It is an incredible character, and he acted so beautifully. He did exactly what they wanted him to do, which was in the serious moments to sell it. But he nails the comedy. He nails the farce and the fish out of water stuff, where Eric Stoltz was playing the tragic aspects of I might never get back. And yeah, that's in the Back to the Future we know and love. But it's not played as tragedy. It's only played as potential tragedy. And Stoltz's handle on the story was entirely different. And even the ending, where Stoltz took this incredibly broad view conceptually, and how he didn't see it as a happy ending. He was going to act it. He was going to do whatever they asked him to do. But he said, now wait a minute. Marty's going back to a new present for him, where the people in his life are now all strangers, with the possible exception of his girlfriend, maybe. But his mom and dad are now completely different. His brother and sister are completely different. It's like he's returning to a time where these are all strangers. Stoltz could not wrap his head around that, and it bothered him, and it bothered Spielberg and Gale that it bothered him. So, again, Fox got it. He was on board with the farce, and he believed also, no, I understand where Eric's coming from, but no, to me, this is a wonderful, upbeat, happy ending. There's no more existential crisis. Just didn't see it that way. So Back to the Future, there were some issues with the title. Sid Sheinberg wanted to call it Spaceman from Pluto. Spielberg executed, I discussed this in an earlier podcast, it's a very involved story, but Spielberg executed an unbelievable bluff of the MCA chief, Sid Sheinberg, to get Sheinberg off of the idea that the title of the film needed to be Spaceman from Pluto. And he kind of inadvertently, well, not inadvertently, his goal was to humiliate Sheinberg without Sheinberg realizing he was being humiliated. And he did it. Spielberg managed to get it done. Spielberg was still very young. He was in his 30s at the time. Sheinberg didn't want to fight with him. He acquiesced, and lo and behold, Back to the Future. So needless to say, the original Back to the Future was a massive monster hit at the box office, and then became a huge hit on VHS and home video. And when it premiered on HBO, it just continued to grow. And then they made 2 sequels, which they shot concurrently, back to back. I thought that was really cool. I didn't know that you could even do that. But when we saw Back to the Future 2, the teaser for Back to the Future 3, it was a full theatrical trailer because film had been shot already. It was already wrapped. It was in the can, which I couldn't get over how I thought that was fucking amazing. So the Back to the Future trilogy is, many people would say, is the greatest trilogy, or maybe the most consistent. I will put the Indiana Jones trilogy just ahead of it. I really like Back to the Future 2 and 3. I feel like they play better now than they did when they came out, because I walked out of Back to the Future 2 as a 15-year-old bitterly disappointed. But Back to the Future 3, I saw in theaters. I liked it a lot. So they're all good. But to me, the Indy trilogy and the OG Star Wars trilogy is better. But Michael J. Fox's performance in all 3 of those films, it's off the charts. It's phenomenal. He's just so damn good and so relatable and believable, because he's not a big guy. Yes, he's an attractive man, but he's still an everyman. As I said about Michael Gross, who played his TV dad on Family Ties for, I think that show aired for 7 seasons. I think it was 7 seasons. Now, Michael did a lot of other really good work on TV. He famously was on the show Spin City, where he won, again, multiple Emmys, just knocking it out of the park, even though, as he talked about in his autobiography, Lucky Man, which I read, it's an incredible read. It is heartwarming and heartbreaking and devastating and so very human all at once. I highly recommend you read that autobiography. But Michael talks about how by the time Spin City was really getting going, he was having to take more and more medication to hide the fact that he was getting sicker and sicker. And he was having less and less controls of the spasms and the kind of movements that he really couldn't do. And he figured out ways to hide. You know, he would be moving this way. And even his speech was starting to become effective. He didn't tell anybody. Man, there was so much money to make. And he was having so much fun, even though he wasn't feeling that great. And the show was a huge hit. It was a huge hit. Nowadays, he can't travel as much as he used to. And I don't want to obviously close this segment without discussing not just his charitable work, the humanitarian work, the fact that he and Ali, you couldn't find two more different people than Michael J. Fox and Muhammad Ali, but both humanitarians, both, as I said, tragic figures in their own way, and hugely inspirational. The amount of money that Fox has raised when he spoke in front of Congress, and there were actually some people that thought that he was putting on an act, that he was pretending to shake, like, my God, what the fuck? Like, of all the things to criticize someone for, he's sick. Are you kidding me? You think he's pretending to go into spasm? What the fuck, man? That he can't move his hands properly? You think that he's acting? Oh, well, he's an actor. Hey, fuck you. But I'll tell one anecdote from the autobiography. And, well, no, I'm sorry. I'm going to close on two anecdotes. The first one is the indication that something was wrong with him physically. He was shooting a movie, a very well-remembered, and a movie that's kind of a Gen X standard and a classic, Doc Hollywood, which he made with, was it Julie Warner? Terrific. She was great in Mr. Saturday Night the next year. And Woody Harrelson. Michael J. Fox tells a story of, and he was in a massive partying phase of his life. He was doing too much drinking, and I don't know what other kind of toxic substances he was taking, but he certainly was not doing right by his own health. And he wasn't depressed, but he wasn't in a good place. He said he was waking up hungover, and he was having difficulty getting to the set on time every single day. But that being said, he and Woody Harrelson went out, and they tore up the local bar nearest to where they were staying and where they were shooting, you know, a nice hotel, a Waldorf. And Fox bought drinks for everybody, spent $5,000, $10,000, whatever it was that night. It didn't matter. He's making so much money, and he was not in a bad place. He was enjoying life. He was happy. He's still in his 20s. He woke up the next morning with the first symptom, unfortunately, of Parkinson's, and it wasn't fully diagnosed for at least another year. His right pinky was in a spasm that was scary as fuck, and it didn't make any sense. He was 29, and that was the first indication that something was wrong neurologically. And here we are, 33 plus years later, and every day since that day, one way or another, Parkinson's has played a role in his life. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that he's a father and a husband to a wonderful, and she was a terrific actress in her own right, Tracy Pollan. Wonderful actress, and they actually met on Family Ties. And the character that she plays is a challenging woman. Marty meets her. He is at odds with her at first because she's a feminist and he's a Reagan Republican, and there's a lot of humor, but she's such a terrific character that the two of them fall in love on the show, which kind of mirrored what happened in real life. And by the time Michael started to show the symptoms, he and Tracy were together. And they have been together for more than 3 decades. And there are so many cliches, especially when someone goes downhill. And Ali's third wife, Lonnie, was an angel, and like sent from the heavens kind of angel for him. And Tracy Pollan for Michael J. Fox, same thing. And she's terrific in the movie with Michael also, Bright Lights, Big City. But when his health took a turn, she seems to have devoted her life to him and them and their family. And I mentioned in a recent podcast how Rick Moranis was somebody that was an enormous star, and his wife passed away, and they still had young children. And Moranis was already probably worth $20 million, and he didn't need the money anymore. He wanted to be a good dad to his kids, and there's different ways of being a good dad, but he wanted to be present in their lives as they grew up. Tracy Pollan didn't want to miss anything. And Michael, even with Stuart Little, he made a ton of money. He made so much money. He just did so well with Spin City that none of them even really had to worry about it. And it seems that her goal is to make him as comfortable as possible every day. As cliche as that sounds, her life is him. His life is her and their kids. And they're such a beautiful family. And the irony with Michael is he still looks good. Facially, yeah, you could see he's older. But if I didn't know he was close to senior citizen age, I wouldn't know. He still has his hair. He still has the smile. It's very difficult for him to get around. And I realize I've left out a ton of movies that you probably love. If you like Peter Jackson's The Frighteners, Secret of My Success, another big one in the 80s. But Michael J. Fox is so much more than the hit movies and hit TV shows. He is just a wonderful human being who was dealt a very, very horrible break, like Lou Gehrig with ALS. Was so young when he was afflicted and stricken and was gone within a couple of years. But Michael J. Fox, one of a kind, a true unicorn in a business where so many people are the same and act the same. Happy 63rd birthday to one of my favorite people to ever work in the movie business, Michael J. Fox. This has been episode 210 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for joining me here on this Sunday in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you caught this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 211 real soon. Till then, peace.